I wanted to do just an overview of arrays really quickly, and then either in this recording or another one I'll go over the alt sum, and then I'll try to do Shakespearean and Psalter so that you have an idea of how to approach these programming assignments. Now notice in this one I'm going to import the random class. I might make use of some random numbers in here, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And this is one for alt sums. You can actually do this in main. You don't actually have to create your own separate class file, although you could if you wanted to. But I'm going to do this in main. And I've got a URL here. If you go out to Google and you Google something like Java Arrays tutorial, and you get the Oracle link that's nuts and bolts of arrays, that is a really good source to go to for information on arrays. Chapter 7 has arrays and array lists. I'm just going to focus on arrays in this lecture. Now in the past, if we needed multiple variables, say that we needed 10 integers, we would have had to have declared each one. I only did 4 here because I got tired of typing. And then I would have to set the value in each one. So you can see that's just for 4 variables. That's a lot of code. Imagine it was 10 or 100. Well, Java gives us a way in one line of code to set up a list or a collection of multiple variables as long as they are of the same type. So if I need 10 integers, or I need 10 doubles, or 10 strings, or 5 strings, or 100 doubles, as long as everything I'm going to do with that array is all the same data type, then I can use one line of code to, in effect, allocate memory units for multiple variables to hold multiple values. And so an array lets me do this. And again, keep in mind that I can't mix and match, okay? I can't say, well, I want something that'll hold 2 integers and 3 doubles and 1 string. I can't do that. It has to be all integers, or all doubles, or all strings, or all booleans, but it has to be the same data type. Each memory unit I'm going to allocate has to be for the same data type. So if you want to visualize an array, think about a spreadsheet, and we have one-dimensional arrays and two-dimensional arrays. We're going to start out only dealing with 1D or one-dimensional arrays, and you can think of that as a row going across, okay? You might have cells in a spreadsheet going across a row. We're not thinking in terms of columns, we're only thinking of a row going across the page when we visualize an array. And there's a nice picture of that at this tutorial as well. So if I want to declare 10 integers and use one line of code to do it, I can use this format right here. I start out with the data type, in this case int, and then I put 2 square brackets, an open bracket and a closed bracket with nothing in them. And that signifies to Java that unlike this variable here, which is a single unit, it holds 1 int value, this clues Java in to expect to create something that's going to hold multiple values, multiple integers. Then I put the name of it, what I want to call it, XYZ, nums, an array, whatever I want to call it comes next. And then I put equals new. Now we're not used to doing this with integers. We're used to just doing, int num1 equals 1 semicolon, or int num1 semicolon. Well, now when we deal with an array, we have to do something that's a little more like declaring an object, in effect, where we have that whole equals new thing going on. We're doing the exact same thing here, and I'm just telling you that maybe that's a way you can associate it or remember how to declare an array. And then I specify the data type again and the square brackets again, but this time I put the total number of items that I want this thing to allocate memory for in the brackets. So what I'm telling Java here is to create a one-dimensional array named nums that will hold 10 integers. So that is one way to declare an array. So data type, open close bracket, the name equals new data type, bracket with the total number of values. I want to hold 10 integers, so I put a 10 in there. Now the other way you can declare an array, you can do it in one line of code or two. Sometimes people, for whatever reason, decide to declare an array using 2 lines of code. And the way you do this is a little more similar to the way that we're used to declaring integers. You put the int with the 2 angle brackets with nothing between them, and then you put the name of the array. So I'm going to call this an array on one line. And then somewhere else in your code, it might be right after it, might be a few lines down in your code. You have to finish out telling Java exactly how many integers you're going to need memory for. So you do that by putting an array equals new int. So in other words, I'm basically just breaking this here, right? And then I'm coming down here and sticking nums in front of equals new int again. So 2 ways to declare an array, with one line, which is what I like to use, but sometimes you might need to do it this way. For example, you might have a scanner and you might be asking the person, how many integers do you want to store? If they type in 100, you might be using a variable here. So you might have this declared at the top of your code, and then you might have a scanner set up in between this and this line, and here you might be using a variable. So sometimes you'll need to declare it in 2 lines. Although you notice it's basically the same declaration, you just have to stick this little extra an array equals here on the second line. Then finally, here's a third way to declare and initialize an integer array in one motion, one line of code. Here I'm declaring it and I'm setting up or allocating enough memory to hold 10 integers, but I'm not putting any values in there. They're all zeros. Same thing here. I'm allocating the memory for 10 ints, but I have not put a value in yet, and Java defaults them to 0. Whereas here, I can declare an array and initialize it. I can give it the 10 numbers that I want in those memory units, those 10 integers. Notice if I do it this way, I don't have to put the equals new and put the brackets with how many items. Java will count and see that I have, for example, in this case, I have 10 numbers, but say I had 9. Java will count and figure out that I have 9 numbers there, and it will understand that there's a total item count of 9 or 10 or whatever. So I don't have to specify in the angle brackets the total number of items if I do it this way. And what I've done is I put the values 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 16, 5, and 2 in my array. So I've declared it and initialized it with values other than 0 here. Now you can do an array of doubles, right? And here I just use the 2-line method to set up an array to hold 5 doubles. Here I use the 1-line method to set up an array to hold 2 booleans, or I could do 20 or however many I wanted. Here I set up an example of how to declare an array of strings, okay? So this will hold 6 strings, 6 words potentially, 6 sentences if I wanted it to, 6 paragraphs, strings of characters. So those are all the ways you can declare and initialize variables. Now these would get set to 0 for default values. The string, I believe, would be null or empty string. I need to double check that. But I'm just declaring and allocating memory here. I have not set any values. Java will set default values for me on these, whereas here I'm declaring and initializing it in one step. Now say I'm looking back at my nums array. So I set up an array to hold 10 integers, but I have not set the values yet. They're all defaulted to 0. One way I can set values in an array is to hard code them, which I've done here. Notice, and this is critically important, when you're dealing with an array, you must start counting with 0. Whether you like it or not, If you try to fake it out, some people will say, well, I need 10 numbers, so I'll make an array that holds 11 items and I'll skip the 0 one because I don't like that. That's too stressful and confusing, the 0 offset. So I'll skip the 0 one and I'll put all the numbers in the 1 through 10. They'll take points off on you on the AP exam if you do that. You have to master the idea that for certain things, sorry about that, you have to count with 0. Whether it's doing a substring with a string, whether it's doing this array, you have to start counting with 0. So, we call this number here the index number. It's really sort of the unique address that identifies one element from another. Because I have these 10 items and they're all named nums. So how can I tell the first one from the middle one, from the last one, from the second one, from the fourth one? The only way I can do that is sort of like being at the post office and looking at the post office boxes on the wall. Each person gets a post office box with a number. 800, 252, 10, right? That number is the address and it's unique. Only one person gets box number 10. They can't give it to 5 people, they give it to one person. And that's how they tell John has box 10, Jane has box 12. Okay, so that's the unique way we tell post office boxes apart. Well, it's the same idea here. In each array, we're going to have a location 0 or index 0, a 1, and we're going to go sequentially, and that's how we determine or tell apart one value from another. So the first number will always have an index of 0. The last number will always have an index of total items minus 1 because of the 0 offset, because we're counting starting with 0. So if I have 10 items, I can guarantee you the index number or unique identifier or address, if you will, of the last item will always be 10 minus 1, 9. If I have 900 items, the index number of the last item will always be 900 minus 1, or 899. If I have 12 total items, and I start counting with 0, the index number of the last item will be 12 minus 1, or 11. So the last item, you can always get the index number by taking the total count, which I specified here in the angle brackets, minus 1. So that's one way to put values into the array. Another way, used a lot, is to write a loop, a for loop. This is why I said for loops will make a lot more sense in Chapter 7. You will pretty much exclusively use for loops with arrays. Why? Because I can tell it to start at 0, I can tell it to go 1 at a time, I can tell it to loop until it gets to the end of the array, right? So my highest index number, this is why you have to know the last index number. I have to know what it is because I can't go over it here. I have to loop while I is less than or equal to that last index number of 9. If I try to put a 10 here, I'm going to get an error, array index out of bounds, meaning I'm trying to reference an item with an address or index number of 10 that does not exist because the last number is 10 minus 1 or 9 if there are 10 in the array. That's where that gets really important. So I can loop through each item in the array and say I want to put the numbers 1 to 10 in there like I did up here. Well, I have to do a little fake out here because I is 0, right? But I don't want item 0 to hold a 0. I want it to hold a 1 like I did up here. So I just add 1 to I, and that's going to store a 1 in item 0. It's going to store a 2 in item with index of 1, and so on. I could also make random numbers and fill this thing in, and I'll try to show you that in another recording. So I'm going to wrap up because I'm about out of time. I'm going to pick up here in another recording and I'll try to do the alternating sums for you.